if you look, the film never cuts mid-shot. Wait for the bicycle to go all the way across the frame before you see something else happening on the other side, and that sets up a certain polytemporality, which you don't really realize it, but it's operative throughout, within and across the video. Oh, Tonya doesn't mind me saying, but Tonya's partner Tyler, who we worked with for again about 15 years. Tyler was there too, recording everything, listening, tuning into everything that's going on. So, you know, if you're a small crew, you have some trusted collaborators, people who are tuned into how you think, and who share the desire to undertake a certain kind of exploration. And there's a certain, you know, aspect of autodidactism about it. It's not that any of us are scholars, but we are in touch with Tagore scholars, but we ourselves are clearly not. But there is a desire to put one's skills and one's technosensorial capacities to fully not immerse, but recursively allow one's practice to be recursively made over by the experiences you have. You're allowing the experience to change the concepts that you bring to that experience. So there's a recursive process that is ongoing. And so a lot of the decisions we're making are coming out of that, the kind of recursive insights we're getting from the continual encounters that Kate is having through the camera, that Tyler is having through his microphone, and the kinds of conversations that we're having. When you input all of those over time and recurrently, you have something like a matrix of preoccupation. And that can then act as a kind of engine for a kind of video thought, a kind of videographic essayistic mode, the mode that Anjali spoke to. And that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a practice of documentary that can create a certain convocation, a certain gathering of the living, the no longer living, and the to be living, the not yet living. We think documentary is not a question of genre, it's not a question of format, it's a question of summoning a relation, it's a question of building relations between the living, the dead, and those who are not yet living. It's a question of setting up those conditions, and that's part of what we're trying to do in this project. That's not even to say, that's even before we get to the in a way, the soul-cosmos relation, which is related to those temporal relations.
I think also, I never trusted education. I never trusted, university. I had quite a life before I went to university, because it was free. You could go after you'd done other things, you know, like figure out what you want to study as a kind of necessity. So art seemed to be full of trendy kids, kind of, who didn't know much about the history of colonialism and all that. So one wasn't necessarily drawn to going to think about all of this together. I was at SOAS, but I didn't like it particularly. I think creating Otolith was very much about, you know, drawing this mess, as Antonio put it, together, and to kind of not order it, but to allow things to be as they are. I think when you grow up with the screen and experimental TV, and there's great clubs, there's great music, roam around, dropping in on people's houses, being extremely naughty, you know, stealing things on weekends and clubbing, you know, whatever you're doing, whatever crazy life you once had, you know, you cannot then become, you know, ordered into a kind of education system, PhDs. I can't. So the sense of creating Alternative for me was to be able to bring people together, very much, and it's just happened quite normally without a big ritual or without any kind of drama or cooking for lots of people over the years in our house, and bringing all kinds of people together. The table has very much been a kind of education for an education platform for me, and for, you know, to bring people together who don't get on. You know, symposium the idea of feast comes from the idea of symposium. People are supposed to debate and argue, get hot-headed, break a chair, walk out, whatever. People call it triggering now. I just call it argument and debate. You know, and I think that this drawing together and fundamentally to be hospitable to strangers. I think when you are of colour growing up in London, you're very aware of people's hospitality, and they can give you something like a piece of bread and cheese and something, and it can be so beautifully given. You know, where you can see people love to be hosts, and I think that hospitality is something that's very important to us, both in terms of our library and in terms of giving people refuge.
I think one of the things you see in the film is this very fluid relationship between art, life and education, which I think you capture very beautifully on this kind of philosophical thinking with that. In a way, I'm curious about how you think about, let's say, pedagogy or education in your practice. You touched on it a little bit because you have been developing this department of xenogenesis, and you're about to move your library from your home to a space in London and to develop a project over a year where you'll be drawing out from that as a context to gather, I think, with different people, different ideas. And I think one of the things that in a way you touched upon already, that I love about your practice is that it's very shifting between different scales and different settings. Sometimes that's private, sometimes it's public, sometimes it's film, sometimes you're producing other artists' work. And I'm curious to hear you talk a bit about how these different facets of your practice kind of feed each other. How you think about that as a practice more broadly. And to talk a bit about the library and the xenogenesis as a concept.
I'll just say something very quickly and Kojo can take over. Yeah, I mean, it's not our whole library that's moving. It's a new space that's being organised by this foundation. I told them that they should just support our house and our library, and they were like, no, let's do it in our space in central London. I was like, well, okay. So we have been developing a series of towers. We're going to put the various elements from the library in that space. But it's basically to kind of produce a sort of enthusiasm around thinking. I think we need resources. We walk around with a black hole in us at the moment, at least I do. I mean, many of us do. There seems to be very little reason to do anything when there's this genocide going on. It feels extremely this genocide and, what could potentially happen to Kashmir, and playbooks of genocide being normalized. And I just wanted to say, I think it's kind of fundamental to produce resources so people can find a language to do something and say something and make something these days.
Yeah, that's another really good question. I think neither of us studied film or video. So I studied literature, studied English literature at Oxford University. Kind of a bad idea. Seemed a good idea at the time, but certainly, you know, that's not where the love of moving images came from. It preceded that. So, you know, for as long as I can remember, I've been watching films and videos in settings much like this. So a setting like this is the primal scene. Sitting with people who are pretty much strangers, but who are all not so much united, but gathered in front of a screen, which, in the words of Serge Danet, a screen that watches over them as much as they look at it. So pretty much everything I know about film and video comes from these moments. So in a certain way, screenings like this are really formative. They are the primal scene of my childhood, in a way, because that's pretty much what I was doing, going to, you know, across London there were two major repertory cinemas. There's the Scala in King's Cross, and there's the Everyman in Hampstead. And they're showing different kinds of films. This is the 80s and the early 90s. The Scala's showing like Pasolini and John Waters, Sergei Parajanov, and the Everyman is showing Nouvelle Vague. It's showing Godard and Truffaut, Jacques Rivette. And so I would go from one to the other. That's what I would do, because they were very cheap. I'd go there by myself and sit there. And so you're watching films which are fundamentally adult movies, but you are a teenager. So you're watching things you don't necessarily have an emotional language for, but you are nonetheless profoundly attracted to them. So I would say that idea of films that you can't understand, but which you are nonetheless attracted to, that's the kind of psychic structure of spectatorship that informs kind of everything, actually. The desire to be in front of something that you cannot master, and that confronts you with a certain kind of limit experience, which you are drawn towards precisely because you can share them. So the limit experience, it's not just yours. It's not yours. It's not privatized. It's socialized. It's what Laura Harris calls an aesthetic sociality. She talks about an aesthetic sociality of blackness in relation to the work of C.L.R. James and Helio Erutisika. These figures who are leaving their comfort zone to go. C.L.R. James is leaving his comfort zone in middle-class Trinidad to go into the working-class areas to study Matthew Bondsman, who was this working-class cricketer who played like an angel. And C.L.R. is studying him, like, how does this guy do this? And Helio Erutisika is leaving his middle-class neighborhood to go and study samba in the favelas of Sao Paulo. It's just like amazed by what people are doing. So that kind of urge to be in a social structure, that's what's informing the psychic structure of what it is I want from videos, and what it is we're trying to continually evoke, not to replicate, but to invoke each time. And part of that speaks to the notion of DXG, to get to DXG. So DXG it's the term we use, the shorthand term for the notion of the Department of Xenogenesis. So that's an exhibition that we started in 2019 at the Van Abbe Museum with the great curator Annie Fletcher, who worked at the Van Abbe for many years and now runs the Irish Museum of Modern Art in Dublin. And so XG, Xenogenesis, comes from the work of the great science fiction writer Octavia Butler. I'm sure many people here are familiar with her novels, but Octavia Butler for me is is a philosopher, really, who's really using the genre of science fiction to really elaborate certain thought experiments. And the notion of xenogenesis, as far as I understand it, that's her theorization. So xenogenesis, as you know, xeno stands for strange. Genesis stands for, origin or beginning. So the notion of, a making strange, and also a becoming familiar with a making strange. The argument is that diasporic peoples have a certain familiarity with the texture of becoming strange. Paradoxically, they are at home in becoming alien. We are at home in becoming strange to each other and to ourselves. And the idea is that the films that we watch are a way of staging that encounter with becoming strange, and inviting other people into that. And those are the kind of those are the impulses and the imperatives that we're trying to share and to summon.
The library is going to be also kind of, I think, looking at various different strands. So one of them is based on transnational feminism, looking at the Women's International Democratic Federation in more depth. And this gets to the cosmos in terms of circling back to this horrific Katy Perry in space kind of shit show, and Botox in space, because my this grandmother, who was head of the National Federation of Indian Women was friends with Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first woman in space, and as some of you might know, our first film, Ocelot 1, was conducted doing zero gravity in the Russian Space Agency, a project which was organised by the Arts Catalyst in London and the NSK. Some of the members of Neue Wiener Kunst, Dragan Givadino, Marco Pelahan, created the opportunity for artists to be in space, and so Kojo and I are civilian autonomous astronauts, cosmonauts. And we performed several encounters with zero gravity, sleeping in space, the history. It's our first film. So in that film, we were very much, looking at everything from data to dust, in a way, in terms of the verticality that exceeds kind of phallic buildings and human architectures, into, the scales of thinking from everything from the center of the Earth to the cosmos. That was our manifesto in 2002. We knew that 9/11 was some kind of site for, a giant reordering of everything. I think it was called Project 2020, Project 1999, or it was a pre-Project 2025. Oh yeah, Project for the New American Century. That was the pre-Project 2025 nightmare. That was almost enacted by 9/11. So we knew that the Iraq War, we had a sense that everything was going to kind of happen as it has happened, in a way. The relationship with Tereshkova as this once wonderful supporter of the internationalist feminist movement, and my grandmother, was something to speculate on because I didn't have any archives at that point. Later I found more archives, and more recently, because of the book of Elizabeth Armstrong, who's written a book called Bury the Corpse of Colonialism, which looked at the 1948 gathering of all these different women coming from out of the Second World War, out of concentration camps, women who were leading different movements in France and Germany, meeting women for the first time who were anti-fascist. These are anti-fascist women, meeting women from anti-colonial women leading similar movements to my grandmother across the continent of Africa and Asia. They all met, leaders of these movements met in Peking at the People's Palace in 1948, the year of the Nakba, and many other things. Hiroshima, a bit earlier, but still Hiroshima was an anti-nuke gathering as well. So they were all, this is a huge history that I've sort of peeled slowly over the last 20 years. We've kind of been taking the layers of it. And I think in terms of what transnational, people talk a lot about transnationalism, but I think there's a lot of problems with that term, now, in terms of how on the most negative fronts there are sort of all kinds of appropriations of feminism going on. I was in a kind of long discussion with a friend called Bahar Nurizadeh, an Iranian Canadian artist who we've been curating for the last, we've been curating her work, and we've been talking a lot about the situation. I mean, she's been talking a lot. There's a brilliant interview with her on Novara Media on the situation of Iran and feminism, and the way it's being appropriated by Netanyahu, and I mean the more complex history there of Iran. But there are many examples of how kind of forms of transnationalism might actually produce very negative effects. So I think it's important to look at the history of transnationalism in terms of what this history was about, which preceded Bandung, which preceded the anti-nuke movements in Europe, and many other movements. They were looking at revolutionary motherhood. They were looking at education for women across the world. By 1953, there were 250 members of the Women's International Democratic Federation across Asia and Africa, mainly from peasant backgrounds, mainly women from the agricultural world. To kind of also go back to Tanya's points, I think this is an incredible history to look at in more depth. So one of the things we'll be doing is bringing various different women together from different parts of the world to look at this history, but also to look at kind of conditions in the present around transnational feminism. Kojo's we're also going to be doing something on the police trials. Maybe you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so it's it's a strange thing when you take parts of the collections. If you're a kind of a post-studio practice artist, you don't have a studio with paints.
I do now.
You do, but I don't, and I'm not going to. The post-studio practice is the library. It is the books, the magazines, the pamphlets, the journals, the CDs, the albums, the DVDs, the files. That is the studio. So the effort is to take moments from those collections and then build conversations around those. So it's a simple structure, but it's designed to open up certain interpretive communities afforded by certain kinds of media and at different scales. So from very small conversations around the vicissitudes of education in the UK, the kind of problematics of education, the kind of segregationist operations of secondary schooling in the past and now, the ongoing murders of peoples, largely young black men in police stations in England. There have been 3,000 since the 1970s. There hasn't been one conviction, not one conviction of one policeman for one murder. So there was an effort to take the British state to court, to the International Court of Human Rights, such as it is, for its crimes against black people. So the idea is to have conversations. There were several of these kinds of dialogues and trilogues, which we are planning around certain moments and episodes from our work. So the idea is to use the idea of a library to to circulate knowledge outside of academic institutions. So in a certain sense, of course, a para-academic practice is familiar from different artists, but in a way, it's the particular kinds of occasions afforded by particular means of political reproduction. So if we can scan and digitize as many pamphlets as possible, then people can access them and use them, and then we can contribute to the kind of there's an already existing network of spaces in London and across the UK, such as the George Padmore Institute, which is above New Beacon Books, in North London, the Black Cultural Archives in Brixton, the Institute of Race Relations Archives in Pentonville Road, the London Metropolitan Archives in Pentonville Road. Yes, the Feminist Library in Broadgate. There's another feminist library at Goldsmiths, Mayday Rooms, which is a brilliant space for hosting all kinds of left-wing archives in Fleet Street, right in the heart of the enemy. So in a way, we want to articulate our library in relation to those existing libraries. There's a friend of ours, Dubravka, who calls librarians information shamans. And she's very experienced in kind of library practice, bibliographic practice. So we want to connect what we're doing to those wider practices.
I can see Peter hovering. Are we allowed to take some questions?
They would be later.
Okay, later on. Okay, that's good then. Do we have to finish now? Oh, that's a shame. I have more questions, but I guess we'll talk informally. And Anjali and Kojo are around for the day, so I think there's plenty of opportunity for everyone to come and talk more with them. So, well,
come
thank
to
you
London,
both.
come to the...
Yeah, and the library will be, when's it starting?
We're waiting, well, it's because it's a new space, every little thing has to be kind of, planned.
The latest date we have is end of June.
The latest date.
How do people find out about it?
It'll be on various different platforms. I mean, this Instagram, which feels like this toilet, but still interesting things. You can locate there or on our website.
Okay. Thank you so much for being
Thanks,
here.
Emily.
Okay, thank you, Emily, Kojo, and Angelica. So we power through also, and we continue. We continue with our keynote speaking, continuing with the ideas of rethinking epistemologies and different knowledge. We have, are you asking something? Oh, sorry, someone had their hand up. Okay, so now we have our keynote speaker, Nikita Dahwan, and presenting a talk also about rethinking knowledge in the post-colonial world, dare to know versus care to know, right?
So, just a little anecdote. Actually, I think Anjali forgot about it, but you took a group of Jai students to Santiniketan together with Grant Watson in 2016. So, thank you for that. You forgot about that, but we've been there thanks to you. So I just wanted to mention that history is there and part of a learning trajectory. So thanks.
There's things also.
Yes, probably, yeah. Students that give some opportunity to go back home. Could be like a bit tiresome to go back tonight, but
Yeah.
I can sleep through tomorrow too.
Yeah. I think it's like a nice chance to see each other.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah, I stayed the day tomorrow here.
Yeah, I didn't really mix it great, but I'm here. I don't think Christmas Amsterdam. But now I don't yeah, if you have stars. Yeah. Wait, then you go back to Amsterdam. Okay, so.
Okay, Dina had to step out, so I'm going to take over her role for a moment. I wanted to quickly introduce Nikita, not by reading her biography, but by saying that we had an incredibly beautiful exchange a couple of weeks ago when we spoke about the relation between agriculture and knowledge, and about our grandfathers and our grandmothers. So I think there are a lot of grandmothers with us in the room today. And I want to thank Nikita. You can read her bio on the website, so I won't waste time on that. But I want to thank you, Nikita, for being with us today against many odds, I guess, like many of us, and to share with us the way to dare to know. Thank you, Nikita. I'll keep it brief.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was invited to die many, many years ago and was never invited again. So I was very thrilled when I got the invitation. I am a bit of a troublemaker. I'll start with one example of my trouble-making capacities and expertise, and then I'll move on to my very short presentation. I'm actually a professional philosopher, which means I get paid to think. I'm not a German citizen, but I work for the German government. I'm a German civil servant, and I'm part of an institution. Sometimes I get the feeling they pay me not to think, but at least my contract says that I'm paid to think. And I was quite fascinated by philosophy as a discipline. The Greek term itself means love of wisdom, love of knowledge. And so this term knowledge is something that I'm fascinated by. I'm also exploring what the differences are, but what the overlaps are also between data, information, knowledge, and critical labor, critical intelligence. So these are some of the contemplations that I'm going to share with you all in the next half an hour. But on a personal note, as Antonia mentioned, my family comes from west of Punjab. My grandfather was a farmer, and when the partition happened of the Indian subcontinent, they did not leave till the very last minute, because you of course do not leave land so easily. And my father had class mobility, which means that the son of a farmer, when he goes to the university to study, guess what did he study? Agriculture. He got a degree in agriculture. And at some point, being the pampered child of somebody who had class mobility, I declared to my father as a young person that I wanted to study philosophy. And my father was very concerned, very upset, and he was absolutely against the idea. And he also forbade me, so to speak, not to, change to the humanities. And my father had this theory: there are three ways of getting something done: do it yourself, pay somebody to do it, hire somebody to do it, or tell Nikita not to do it. And he made the mistake of telling me not to study philosophy. And when coercion didn't work, he tried persuasion. So he was trying to convince me, look, even if you get a degree in philosophy, you will never get a job, because my family comes from north of, I already mentioned, west of Punjab, we are Punjabis. So he said, the Bengalis have a monopoly on knowledge. They are the intellectuals. They have all the culture. The only culture we have is agriculture. So this was the context in which I went against my father and did get a degree in philosophy. The irony, I think the universe has a very strange sense of humor. I'm absolutely the most godless person you will ever meet. But sometimes I feel that there are gods out there, conniving against me and us. So the irony is that my father passed away recently, and now I've inherited a piece of land where there are 30 trees on it. And so it seems to be from culture, I'm going back to agriculture. I'm in charge, and I'm the person, I am quite popular with my friends, but they never ever give me the responsibility of house sitting their plants, because either I don't give them enough water or I give them too much water. So all the plants die, and now this is my inheritance. I'm in charge of safeguarding 30 trees and thousands of plants. My father did his degree in agriculture and then did a second degree in horticulture. So this was the kind of conversation that we had when we were thinking about how to bring together ideas, very abstract philosophical ideas on philosophy, on knowledge, on production, intellectual labor, and at the same time questions of planetarity, questions of ecological destruction. And what I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes, I'll keep it short, are focus on three concepts. The first one is one systematic strategy of destroying diversity, multiplicity, heterogeneity, difference, dissent of epistemologies, cosmologies, ethical practices. So interestingly, in response to the question, what difference does difference make, Enlightenment thinkers like Immanuel Kant, I mean, Enlightenment is considered to be one of the biggest export products of Europe. It's not, and particularly German Enlightenment, it's not Mercedes and BMW, but it's German Enlightenment, ideas of reason, ideas of justice, human rights, transnational, international law, secularism. So, in response to the question, what difference does difference make, Immanuel Kant, which was quite a radical thing to say, quite a revolutionary thing to say, says difference makes no difference. Reason has no color. We're all capable of exercising public use of reason. Kant gives us the definition of enlightenment as translated German first, Ausgang aus der selbstverschuldeten Unmündigkeit, and in English it's translated as exit from self-incurred tutelage, that we are autonomous beings, and which is why we should have the, and this is his other definition of enlightenment, sapere auth. We should have the courage to use our own reason against censorship, against authoritarianism, against forms of, against different forms of power that do not allow critical thinking. So, interestingly, Kant is somebody who encourages risk-taking. He says the only reason why people do not exercise autonomous thinking is either because they're lazy, or because they are cowards, or because they have not been trained to think. So on the one hand, you have Kant telling us all these radical, he's giving us this radical philosophy of knowledge production, and on the other hand, we know Kant was deeply racist, sexist, anti-Semitic. He was of the opinion that women are not capable of thinking, which is why he makes a distinction between private and public use of reason. He talks about euthanasia of Judaism, where he was of the opinion that only way Jews could become citizens was through conversion to Catholicism, and of course he's considered to be a father of modern racism. If you read Kant's writings about what he says about black people, about indigenous people, just to give you a little bit of a sample, he says all Indians look like philosophers, but they are not. Beware. They only look like philosophers because they are not capable of abstract thinking. Now, I spent 6 years in Frankfurt. I had a professorship in Frankfurt, and my former colleague, Jürgen Habermas, who is considered one of the most important public intellectuals of Europe, he constantly talks about how deliberative democracy, we're talking about this kind of forum, as a forum where people come together to discuss, to deliberate, to exchange ideas, and Habermas talks about coffee houses and salons as birthplaces of European enlightenment, as sites where deliberative democracy emerged. And I remember sitting around the table with my Habermasian colleagues and asking them, if coffee houses were the birthplace of enlightenment, where did the coffee come from? Where did the sugar in the coffee come from? Where did the tobacco that these bourgeois white men were smoking come from? Who financed the enlightenment? And as Spinoza says, Europe is literally a product of its continents. So here you see a concerted effort, a systematic effort to squash non-European, non-Western forms of thinking. Just to give a very banal example of what is called colonization of the mind. When Macaulay introduced English education in India, he argued that we want to create a class of people who are Indian in blood and color, but British in taste and manner. Mission accomplished. Exhibit A. I'm a product of exactly this form of colonization of the mind. Now, the challenge that post-colonial queer feminist perspectives and the critique of this kind of production of monocultures of the mind is facing is there's a very, very strong backlash against this critique. And one is accused of normative nihilism in challenging concepts, dominant, normative, hegemonic concepts like human rights, democracy, rule of law, secularism. One is accused that if you start relativizing these kinds of universal principles, you'll end up with Boko Haram. And those of you all who are not familiar with the term, Boko Haram basically translates into Western education is evil. It's a sin. And so the pushback against post-colonial, non-Western perspectives is that this is going to lead to kind of a feature of Western form of emancipatory and progressive politics. The other accusation, interestingly, when one talks about or when one makes a concerted effort against monocultures of the mind, comes from the decolonial approach. And here I'm thinking